Welcome to the Property Funder podcast with me, Michael Dean, and you can block me or mute me on social media. I'm at property_funder across the main social channels. I'm here today with Ashley. Before Ashley introduces himself, just a bit of housekeeping for everyone. First of all, if you are a returning visitor to the podcast, thank you very much. If I can please ask you a favour to do a 5-star review, to subscribe, depending on where you get the podcast from. It means that more people will be able to see and enjoy inspiring and educational content from people like Ashley, who we've got here with us today. Now, next bit of housekeeping is we need to thank today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is Avid Capital. Avid Capital is a development and bridging lender based in London, but lending all over England and Wales on projects from 250,000 to £15 million. And if you want to get in touch with them, they are www.avonmorecapital.com, or you can get in touch with me directly. And generally LinkedIn is the best, as I am one of the co-founders of the business, although I'm not operationally involved anymore. Anyway, without further ado, let's introduce Ashley. Ashley, please tell us your full name and your business and what your business does.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ashley Ilsen. I'm Chief Executive and co-founder of Magnet Capital. We're a leading provider of development finance, so mainly new builds and conversion projects, usually smaller projects ranging between 1 to 12 units. And we've been established since 2018.
That's great. And that business, how did you get into Magnet Capital? What were the steps that you had to take to get there? I mean, do you want to start maybe kind of from teenage years and how you got into the lending industry more generally?
Yeah, I think, my story kind of goes right back to leaving uni. So I suppose I'm a bit unusual in the fact that, well, to put it another way, I suppose no one has ever left university clutching their degree and thinking, I can't wait to get my teeth into short-term property finance. And I just don't think it ever works out like that, whatever route you take into the industry. I left uni with 2 good degrees and a master's degree in international business. I lived and worked in China for some time, speak Mandarin to a good level. And I suppose I just did the done thing, is when you leave uni and you kind of start blindly applying for kind of graduate roles. And I suppose I had different levels of success and some kind of quite disheartening feedback along the way as well. And you get a little bit disillusioned with the whole process of, going to uni, doing well, and then, just having very little clue about what you wanted to do in terms of next steps in life. And it came about in a kind of unusual way, in the fact that I was, as I said, I was applying for different graduate roles, and, I was going on like weekends away and with quite, well-known businesses, and thinking, I'm probably going to get very, very lost in a big system here. And from kind of, gauging what these roles actually involved, you could see that you're just going to be a small cog in a very, very big system, and probably going to be the best part of 5-10 years before you're involved in any sort of decision-making process. And being the person that I am, you need to be making a difference. I think from day one, that's the main driver for me, the fact that I wanted to come into a place and actually, start, making my mark and putting my name on something. So really unusually, my mum came to me and said, I've seen a role advertised in a newspaper, and, just asterisk, I think I must be one of the last people of a generation to actually end up with a successful career around the back of a newspaper job advert. And this was 2012 at the time. So, it wasn't really what you did, but she said, I think it's a great role. It's a local business, and I'm gonna send in an application on your behalf. And I think this is probably more fueled by her being sick of me, being around at home every day. So I said, yeah, fine, okay. Well, anyway, I went in for a job interview for a local property group that had a space open in their lending division, which was obviously known as Regentsmead at the time. And through a couple of interview processes, and got the role. And I suppose, actually, probably at the time, I took quite a low starting salary, which the way I saw it was, from looking at the business, I was going to be surrounded immediately by multiple individuals with decades of hard real estate experience behind them. And, even by way of osmosis, just being there I just saw it as being invaluable and ultimately going to pay dividends, which it did, in fairness. That was a hard call because I wasn't really sure which way I wanted to go at that time. But, it turned out to be one of the best moves I ever made. So I joined the business. I was the first new graduate for several decades. So it'd been some time since they had gone through that process. So I think they were kind of feeling out, what role are we creating here? I ended up performing a dual function across the lending business, both in sales and operations. But I also had, an involvement in in the actual property side of things. So, even I remember 3 weeks into my job, I got brought in. There was a property issue within the property business and involving an advertising hoarding. And I went in to speak to, the chairman, the guy in the 70s, along with, a couple of other directors, all, in their 40s, 50s, all, decades of being in real estate. They sat down and said, well, actually, what do you think of this problem? And, I'm sat there, 3 weeks into the job saying, well, I can't believe you're actually interested in my opinion, let alone, the fact that I'm sitting here in a meeting with you. So I suppose, in some respects, I was very lucky in the fact that I found myself immediately in that environment, because that is just an ideal environment for anyone that wants to grow. Okay, firstly, your opinion's being listened to, and secondly, you're actually doing things that matter. And over the years at Regentsmead, obviously progressed through the business, had, some levels of fortune in the fact some senior people above me left for varying reasons. But, I think in life, you make your own luck anyway. So the fact that I was there, I was taking on opportunities. I was, regularly doing stuff like public speaking, contributing to industry press, getting my name out there a lot more, and hopefully developing a good reputation for myself personally, as well as for the company. I suppose it went well because the Regentsmead started hiring other graduates, and there were 3 other graduates that followed me, a couple of whom are really done really well in this industry, have gone on to some very senior positions themselves. So great springboard, great learning curve. I had there was a transition in the business in, I think, around 2016, where I was essentially given I was approached with a couple of roles, but I was also offered the role of running Regentsmead at the tender age of 27, being, stepping up and essentially managing a multi-million-pound business, which was in many respects daunting, but just my attitude of, just say yes and worry about the issues afterwards. Went through that process again, stayed on another year. And that's where I met my current business partner, Sam Howard, who was helping me with running the business. And I think after some time, the owner of the business, it was owned, by a principal, sole director, essentially, who was a philanthropist. And I think he realized that he wanted to focus more on his charity work. He ran a medical research charity that was doing some incredible things in that sector. And with his blessing, I think me and Sam approached him and said, look, we want to grow and be more dynamic and take something a bit where it's going to be for ourselves a bit more. And with his blessing, we were able to start putting the works in motion to launch Magnet Capital. Started speaking to funding partners. We started discussing what a team would look like, where it would be based, and then the next steps was quite easy in the fact that we weren't having a standing start as a lender, which most lenders experience. We were able to refinance most of the Regentsmead, or some of the Regentsmead book. So we already had a loan book established. We already had names. People knew who we were. We had met an incredible funding partner who's still with us today, who have been extremely supportive over the years. And I suppose everything fell into place quite nicely from there onwards.
Right. Well, let's just unpick some of that, because it's it's quite remarkable, really. I mean, what size of loan book when you took over as, I suppose, the managing director, CEO of Regentsmead? What sort of loan book size were you looking after at that time?
So we were writing new business just under 40 million of new business. So the year prior, so we were able to hold that consistently. That was in 2016, where I think you'd experienced some quite aggressive activity, and not just the bridging space, but
in development as well. Yeah.
In development as well, I think there was so much liquidity, as it still is today. But we're seeing serious downward pressure on pricing. And yeah, I think that led to the first stages of Magna Capital, and the fact that we probably, with the current structure, albeit it was a structure and a model that had survived the '08 crash, that had existed for several decades, probably didn't have the same level of freedom that we needed to really kick on and grow. So it was, in some respects, the funding we had in place was slightly restrictive.
But notwithstanding that, though, I mean, the fact that at 27 years old, you were not handpicked, but you were trusted with the responsibility of running a business, managing £40 million a year of new lending business in the development finance sector. I mean, obviously speaks very highly of you as a character. You must have given you an enormous amount of confidence. I actually want to go a little bit further back, and just maybe out of curiosity, but how did you end up learning, spending time in China and learning Mandarin? Was that something you always had an interest in, a passion for? How did it come about? And I suppose the follow-up question is, how do you take advantage of those connections and skills from that time in business today?
Yeah, I first went to China when I was 10 or 11. I actually did a school exchange trip, a 3-week tour of China. Can't remember the reasons why. I think I was just interested in it was a culture that still hadn't, that would have been 2001. It was a culture that probably hadn't, opened up properly at that point. It was still, quite alien to a lot of people, and I was just very interested in it. And it was a real eye opener. But I did things like I spent a few days living with a Chinese family by myself, and I remember, I left them to go on this big train ride across China, and they must have, I don't know, asked their friends or looked in a book, what do English people like? So they packed me off with a sack full of beers at the age of 11 for this train ride across China. And I was thinking, okay, this is interesting. So yeah, I guess I've always had an interest. And then when I came to do my degree, I went to the University of Nottingham, and they had a campus out in China. So as part of my undergrad, I spent time there. I wanted to do a degree where you got to study abroad. And then I went back full time to do my master's degree. And you just, it's serious education in terms of life lessons, how to survive in a foreign country, how to, learn their rules. We even, started exporting crap back home. Stuff like kitchen scales and anything you get your hands on, just sounding rubbish, and it would break, and it was awful. But again, a great experience, and an attempt at being entrepreneurial in a very, very difficult environment where they have completely different ways of doing business, and you have to learn quickly. So I just those are the experiences that help shape you ultimately, and I think. It's the sense of just wanting to try new things, and the sense of wanting to have new experiences, and do all of that before actually formally launching a career. So I was very lucky in that respect that I got to have a lot of that, and it's probably a big part of who I am today.
Yeah, well, it's it's an unusual and an unusual experience that you would have had. At the same time, it's now left you with a very valuable skill. I know at the moment the real estate and real estate finance space in China is things are a bit interesting following the collapse of Evergrande. But notwithstanding that, you're still talking about the second biggest economy in the world. There's a huge amount of liquidity, a lot of money. There's a lot of Chinese interest in UK real estate. No doubt no doubt there will be a time, if not now, that those experiences, maybe the connections and certainly the language and the understanding of the culture will serve you incredibly well. So I like I very much like the anecdote and the analogy, and let's see how that plays out for you. I want to touch on the what you're saying about how you brought into the conversation about the issue with the advertising hoarding 3 weeks into the role. As someone who's been doing a lot of reading around leadership, we've I'm doing a bit of work with Jonathan Bowman Perks, who's been a guest on the podcast as well. He actually introduced me to a couple of books. One of them, which was Turn the Ship Around by L. David Marquet, and what they talk about there is a culture of not leader follower but leader. And the first thing I wrote down when I heard that particular anecdote was very much leader, i.e., that asking you to provide input, socializing the decision making, socializing, getting ideas in. I think something that people, in finance leaders like Ray Dalio do well. From a leadership style, first of all, how great was that to be on? How great was that to be on the receiving end of? As you say, it was great for you to be able to grow. But but from a cultural perspective, is that something that was consistently prevalent through your time at Regentsmead, and is that something then you now try to bring to leadership within Magnet Capital as well?
Yeah, I think there was so much trust instilled in me at that point. So then it was like that's such a key part of it, and you're like, these guys really believe in me, so why shouldn't I believe in me? And you just get an element of that. So another example, I was quite early on, I was asked to do because my boss wasn't available. I was asked to do like public speaking at a private members club in Mayfair, and I'd never done public speaking before. I said yes to it, and I was probably quite nervous doing it, but I did it, and then I started getting invited back to quite a lot of public speaking gigs. So I was like, oh, okay, I'm starting to enjoy this a little bit. But the fact that, at quite a young age, for example, I was invited to do the Henry Stewart conference every year, which is it's a pretty serious conference. They got some great players from across the property industry. And I remember when I was going up there, I was thinking, well, people paying £500 individually to be here, or as businesses to be here to listen to what I've got to say. And I was 24, 25 at the time. Annoyingly, I kept getting asked back every year, but they kept putting me on after this guy from CBRE, and he was such an accomplished speaker. He was like, most people did their talk from like behind a lectern. This guy used to prowl the stage like a cat, kind of gesturing with this newspaper in his hand. And every year I'd come on straight after him. I'm thinking, great. But every time I used to watch him and think, I want to be as good as this guy, because this guy is absolute mustard as what he's doing. And that in itself is just an example of, I think when you give someone, trust, and maybe probably was on the inexperienced side, but, they find a way to, if they're the right individual, they'll find a way to cope with it. I think it's one of the really interesting lessons that I was taught very early on by the owner of Regentsmead, and I went in to discuss a separate property issue with him. And something, quite like bizarre. I can't remember specifically what it was. Something really unusual had happened, and I was just, I was quite animated. I was like, "Can you believe this has happened?" And he said to me, it was like, the thing is about experience is the older you get, the less things surprise you, and that's really stuck with me. Recently we at Magnet Capital, we wrote a loan where kind of a couple of weeks before completion, something came out that right next to the site, there was one of the original owners of the land had been buried there. So you're now saying, hold on, you've got 2 weeks of completion and there's a dead body right next to the site, essentially. And you're thinking, I've not seen this before. This is really unusual. But I was just kind of felt a lot calmer than how I would have reacted maybe 5 years ago, how I would have been 10 years ago. And I think maybe for a time of, just running a business and dealing with so many curveballs consistently, you kind of just develop a way to become more phlegmatic about situations. You have to, because that's the only way you're going to survive. And I think that's just reflective of the advice I was given when I first started out.
Yeah, I think that's something I can certainly connect with is dealing, that the experience means that when you do have kind of situations that are, as you say, curveballs, things that surprise you, should surprise you, you do tend to respond in a slightly more controlled way. I would say you tend to respond rather than react.
Yeah, and, absolutely.
I mean, I think at the moment we're still dealing with a situation, an interesting situation with a very aggressive freeholder trying to take back possession of our client's lease, and they're they're so far in the wrong. They've rode back from their position because they realise that they've gone too far, and now they've put themselves in quite a pickle. But when it all kicked off, I think we dealt with it quite calmly. But ironically, I think we would have been a lot more. I think we would have been a lot more panicked 4 or 5 years ago. I mean, again, it's like when we were being publicly defamed by a borrower, actually 4 years ago now. So just at the start of the pandemic, and you think all of the stuff that's going on in the pandemic, all the stresses you were going through, and just as things are starting to get a bit better around the start of the summer, things are starting to settle down a bit more, and this stuff all started kicking off. And just remember the anxiety levels that I had, and then the same character sort of started piping up again back end of last year for no reason.
Really?
And so we just picked up the phone to Erwin Mitchell, who dealt with the defamation case, defamation action previously. Just said sent the screenshots over, and they dealt with the rest. And it was like, and then didn't really think about it again after that. And it's a bit like, look, that experience, that the benefit of having that extra bit of experience, that bit of I mean, I don't have many grey hairs for someone of my age, but those few grey hairs, or maybe it's the receding hairs, it does help. It does help. You do tend to freak out a little bit less. Thankfully.
I think that's the stuff that no people don't see. You're external to Magna Capital. You're either a competitor or a broker or outside client. You don't see the kind of the sleepless nights tossing and turning, because you've got 3 different problems that are all driving you mad. And I think just part of being a leader is learning how to deal with that. Even stuff like I found changing nutrition and getting better at like sleep hygiene and general practices about how to switch off was so invaluable that you end up being better at making those decisions. So when you are actually under a lot more pressure, you're just in a headspace where you're going to be invariably make better decisions. You won't always make better decisions, but invariably you put yourself in the best possible position to make a better decision.
Yeah, I mean, we normally save the lifestyle conversation to the back end, but seeing you brought it up, I mean, what does your lifestyle look like at the moment in terms of sort of sleep habits, exercise habits, dietary habits? What sort of things are there? Any particular things that you do? And I know some of our audience absolutely loves it, and some of it for those of our audience that don't, that they can skip ahead. But certainly something that I'm quite passionate about. Certainly something that I'm interested in.
I'll keep it brief in that case. So I'll go into too much detail, but I had a point in my career where actually, and this creeps up on you when you actually start putting on a bit of weight. Because you don't think about this stuff, particularly in your 20s, where you probably don't need to think about this stuff as much. And I'm going through like the jean sizes and not really thinking about it. And I was like, I remember, I play football every week, and I did quite a bad injury, which was on my ankle, which was basically just caused from trying to run around at a weight that I shouldn't be naturally. But it's not rocket science. The fact that actually at that time I probably wasn't performing anywhere near where I wanted to at work. I was not firing on anywhere near I should be. Now we're even thinking about stuff like calorie counting and what macros I'm eating. I do that 6 days of the 7 a week. I'm much leaner, and it's no surprise that I'm firing at a much better rate that I want to be at work. So there's absolutely, I would say there's a link there. And yeah, it's impossible to ignore, especially as you start getting a bit older.
Yeah, and I guess in terms of your exercise regimen, you're also doing, obviously we follow each other on Instagram, seeing you in your home gym every day with your German Shepherd, doing your squats and your bench and all the rest of it. So are you doing 2-3 times a week, that kind of thing, or is it almost an everyday thing?
I'm in there 4 or 5 times a week, as much as I can, basically, whatever time I can. The dog's my gym bro. Which is I need my own space. I can blast my terrible music out. I don't have to be surrounded by people you've got a whole production crew just because they're doing like a bench press. Like I don't commercial gyms really rub me up the wrong way a little bit. So I've got my space in there, and that's just a crucial part of my day. A little bit cold in the winter, but it is what it is, and it works really well for me.
I love that. I was reminiscing with my wife because when we were at Bristol Uni, for the first 2 of the 3 years we were there, the free weights room was this sort of, we would lovingly refer to it as the gimp chamber at kind of the sort of Pulp Fiction style dungeon. For those of you, for most of our audience, they've probably seen the film, but I'm not going to go into too much detail. But it was definitely quite Spartan. Definitely. I mean, obviously, we've just seen Carl Weathers of the great actor, and
yes,
who may rest in peace. It was a bit like his gym in LA where Rocky goes to train in Rocky 3 so he can beat Clubber Lang. It's got that kind of spit and sawdust quality to it, and then and you could only have 6 people in it at any one time, so there was always a big rush to try and get in there at the right time. And I absolutely loved it. Smashed out some really nice weight, like PRs in there back in the day. And then we moved the gym moved to this brand new facility, and it sort of spoiled it for me because it was clean, it was sanitized, the lights were on, but it sort of took away that sort of special feeling that once you start to make things a bit nicer, a bit more comfortable, sometimes it ruins it, if you know what I mean. So
yeah.
I definitely can associate with that, and actually that's where, with the place I train at now, when I'm not at my personal trainer, this place called Rebel, it's kind of like that. It's basic, basics by 21st century standards anyway, and I'm here for, I wouldn't want anything more fancy. So I like that.
It reminds me of I think it's the Sugar Ray Leonard quote. Don't tell me if it's not. It's the one where he says, it's a lot harder to get out of bed to run when you're sleeping in silk pajamas.
Yeah,
right. And I think you just, a little bit, rough and ready is not a bad thing sometimes.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's nice and warm. When it's nice and warm inside, I don't fancy getting in that cold plunge. Although at the moment it's not particularly cold, but it's still an effort, a mental effort to go in it. And in terms of like alcohol and things like that, is that something you still have a drink every now and again, or is that something you've kind of cut out or cutting back on?
No, I leave it to the weekends now usually, so avoid during the week drinking, even if it's social with work, just to cut that out, just because I know I'll be groggy the next morning. But I mean, it's really bad because I was walking back from my gym garage, just earlier this morning, and I've got a wine society delivery, and it made me think, as I'm walking up to my door, I'm like, it's Monday morning, and there's a big box saying Wine Society on my front door. And I'm thinking maybe they should offer some sort of discreet packaging option at checkout, rather than all my neighbours seeing that I've got my Monday morning wine in. But no, seriously, I try and hold back when you can, especially from if I'm counting my calories. It's not great to start chucking red wine in because you won't be able to eat much else.
Yeah, it used to be the case that and Summer's deliveries you might want that in a discreet packaging. Now it's now it's your alcohol delivery.
Has the wine people thought about this at all?
yeah, it's the sort of reverse virtue signaling. I think that's great. That's very funny. I mean, you just sort of taking a step back from lifestyle and just sort of going back to your early days within Regentsmead, or at such a young age to be going in and doing public speaking, at such a young age to be offered roles which very much are positions of trust. Can you talk to our younger listeners, our less experienced listeners, about what the key ingredients are to build and develop trust? At the end of the day, we all know trust is earned. So how did you go about building that trust? Give some examples maybe of things that you did that enabled you to take those, to earn that trust with the powers that be at Regentsmead.
Yeah. I think, I'll kind of twist that question a little bit. Actually, when I first came into the industry, it was 2012. So the short-term lending space had been battered and bruised from the crash of 2008, and there were very few, lenders that were active. And one thing it was, or at least I'm generalizing a bit, but one thing it was to me was a little bit of a closed circle. It had a distinct lack of young people in the industry, and I don't think my own experience myself as a young person coming into the industry, coming to meet brokers and wanting to get involved in, I don't know, industry roundtables or what have you, there was almost a kind of sense of, you know, we don't want, you know, kind of young outsiders coming through. I'm generalizing because, you know, there are many, you know, more experienced heads that, you know, advised me and befriended me and you know I met up with, you know, privately as well, and some of whom are still my closest friends in the industry today. So, but you had the sense it was a little bit of a you know, a closed circle. So I found I had to change the way that I spoke with people, and that was really a crucial thing. When I went into, for example, to a sales meeting with a broker who, you know, perhaps, you know, done several decades of you know, banking and, you know, fairness, probably new development lending a lot better than I did, I wouldn't sit there trying to sell to them and explain why you want a product. I'd sit there asking, you know, their advice and their own experience, and kind of that invariably made people drop their guard a little bit more, rather than, you know, me going in and saying, well, here's why you should be using us for our development product. We're fast and flexible and blah, blah, blah. And it's just, I think I had to change tact a little bit, and particularly the way I approach certain situations. Second to that, I grew a beard because that made me look older. And I found that you know, the fact that I was probably a little bit too fresh faced for it was, wasn't great for my progress. But, you know, I think, you know, where we are today is just we've moved on leaps and bounds. You know, there are probably, you know, there are specific training programs for young individuals coming into the industry. Businesses involved are far more professional, and the way they go about recruitment and you know, developing young talent. And I didn't really have any of that. So, like, you know, in many respects, it was much of a kind of discovery process than anything else, about how best to go about that. The fact that I was given the platforms to do so was obviously a big advantage. And the fact that, you know, the way I look at when we're recruiting nowadays, the way that the effect that's had on our recruitment and the way we bring people in is huge. So, for example, other than when we launched straight away from Regentsmead, and there were a lot of ex-Regentsmead people that came with us, every single person we've taken on at Magna Capital has been from outside the industry. We've never recruited a single person from within. That's got, you know, many different reasons, but it means that, you know, I don't bring anyone in with, you know, necessarily got baggage, or they've got a particular way of working, or, you know, if they've worked for a lender that's got, you know, multiple different products and they're coming into essentially a single product lender, maybe it's not as diverse in terms of our product range. So, you know, little things like that where we could bring people in and give them opportunities from other sectors. So, for example, we went on a recruitment drive at the end of last year. We took in 2 new guys on the sales side, and they've both done really, really well. And I had an appraisal with one of them recently, a couple of weeks ago, and he sat down and said, how are you finding it, etc. And he sat down and said to me, I love it. And that was like, you know, music to my ears. He goes, I love it here. And, you know, the fact that someone has got, you know, a similar level of a kind of emotional attachment to my business as I do is said to me that, you know, we must be doing something right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that speaks highly to the quality of the culture you've built within the organisation, within Magnet. What's your? I mean, let's just talk about the I suppose the progress from founding in 2018 to where we are today. Talk us through, talk us through, I guess, the early days. You mentioned you were in a good position, weren't you? That you at least you didn't have to start from a standing start. And I think that there will be people watching and listening to this conversation who are in businesses that maybe have got, shall we say, aging ownership, aging leadership, that maybe is sort of on the wind down. You know, it's not an unusual or unique situation, and there's this perception, I think, that businesses have to start from scratch, have to start from nothing. Now, in fairness, with Avamore, that is kind of how we started, because me, Zaher, Nick, we were outsiders to the industry, and we started from nothing. But it doesn't mean you have to do that. It's generally, I would say I'd be less inclined to do that. I think the way you went about it was very smart, because you had the opportunity to take effectively an existing loan book, and you were able to start. You effectively you were getting a bit of a running start, weren't you? When you got started, because you took over a loan book. That loan book was generating effectively a revenue, and it meant that, if nothing else, you could plan cash flows on the back of at least the income generated from that loan book, so that even if you didn't originate any new loans for any period of time, you had some degree of predictability about revenues that be able to generate from that, which probably enabled you to plan and business plan around that. So taking that into consideration, what did the early years of Magnet look like?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We had quite a few advantages in that sense, and I remember one of our funding partner, essentially they're essentially private equity guys, and they fund businesses across every industry you can think of. And one of our main contacts, who's a non-exec in our business, he's been doing this a long time, and he said, in all the years we've been backing businesses, this is the most accurate business plan that we've seen, because after year 3, year 4, we were still on the plan that we gave them early on. Admittedly, we started to diverge from that eventually, but it was almost it's so hard to plan a business where cash flow is absolutely everything. I think, yeah, when we went about that step, I think that it was more crucial for us to find the right funding partner, because we spoke to a lot of different types of funder, and this is from an equity perspective, and we just I didn't want to be a funder where I could say to you, yeah, we'll go and do this deal, and it could potentially be pulled further up the chain, because then we essentially are another broker in between. I wanted to have the ability to meet a client and say, we could do this on the spot, and I'm essentially one half of the credit committee, so to speak, and that gives us a real competitive advantage, particularly in the smaller space where we are, where it's going to be, a lot of it is going to be probably more relationship driven than necessarily price or leverage driven, as it often is, I think, when you move further up the food chain. And so, yeah, we met a funding partner, and they've been tremendously supportive of us from day one. But I think the fact that we were able to launch, with not just a book in place, but with our names behind it. Don't get me wrong, we were still extremely cost conscious. We started in a room with no windows, and so we wanted to show that actually we're not going to sit here and suddenly start being a bit silly about it. And I think we've come a long way since then. We've now got lots of windows in our office, but we've also been able to demonstrate that actually the model that we started with is something that we could develop and not just stick to that. It's something that needed to change a bit. We could make it more dynamic. We could tweak certain aspects. And the fact that we could continue to develop it and make it, essentially more modern.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't realise that windows were so expensive in Elstree, Ashley, but there you go.
Now I remember there was one day where it was 2019, and there was like a freak snowstorm that happened one day in like it was a February. And someone stuck their head out the office, and they were like, "Well, why is the building empty?" And then we went to the hallway, and where you could actually see outside, and lo and behold, everyone had left, and the whole place was covered in snow. We had serious difficulty getting home. But yeah, look at us now with all our windows.
Yeah. Yeah, sort of. Almost want to put on a Borat voice there, don't you? And, being in the castle. Yeah. No, that's great. So. It started out with you and Sam, and obviously you mentioned some of your recruiting. How many people are you now in total?
So across the whole business, there's 9 of us. So we started with me, Sam, the other managing partner in the business, Paul Israel, who's finance director, and our head of operations, Deborah Lebovitz, is ex Regentsmead. So I've worked with Deborah, and Sam for 12 years now. And our operations team is entirely female, and they are an amazing part of our business. And we have our sales team, which younger guys that are a bit newer to the industry, and probably what we've done before is recruit from kind of people with ex-property backgrounds, but not lending backgrounds, as I said. So for example, one of the guys we take on is an ex-estate agent, so he's came in with a good grounding of property knowledge. And I found that transition works actually really nicely. So we've done that a couple of times previously, and it's always worked quite well.
Yeah, talking to Dimitri, we moved probably over the last year and a half to an internal RM, external RM, I suppose, or internal BDM, external BDM type model. And, with the idea that for those of you that aren't familiar, that an internal relationship manager is someone who effectively is in the office on the phones. External is going out, meeting clients and brokers and key relationships, etc. And the internal will eventually graduates to the external if they do the right thing. And we found the conveyor belt, or the talent pool for internal RMs within a state agency to be fantastic. And certainly that it's interesting that you've kind of gone down a similar model, similar approach. What's let's talk about your aspirations. Well, so actually, before I do that, and you mentioned you were originating about 40 million a year, kind of at the peak of Regentsmead, and then I think you were kind of when the market went full amicus. Then I think those in the know will know what I'm talking about.
If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. Into 2016, which in fairness, Avonmore started back end of 2015. So sort of the full amicus. It was remember the back of the net advert. Do you remember that? 70% net. Yeah, and that was those were the days.
Yeah.
And amicus were very aggressive on development lending, I guess, which put pressure on, I think, the rest of the market to try and keep up.
Absolutely.
You at Regentsmead when you were at Regentsmead, you were very your approach to credit was very, very rigid, which probably for the most part would have served you very well. But at the same time, there's a limit to the amount of volume you can put out. So yeah. You said you were doing about 40 million a year. What sort of volumes are you now originating? What sort of size of book are you kind of getting towards as we speak today?
Yeah, I mean, look, the main thing from our point of view is that we've grown year on year since we've launched Magnet. So I suppose we're kind of transitioning from what I would describe as a smaller lender to a medium lender. I know that's a little bit subjective in terms of what that entails. I think the way I see it is that the way we like to live is so much about target setting and forward thinking, and you can have a business plan, and we got to be looking in the future. And one thing I've kind of changed recently is the way I like to think about things, and I think there's a little bit of a lack of focus on where we are in the now and what we're achieving at the moment. So I do try and focus a lot on what we're trying to do today, and where we are today and what we've achieved and how far we've come, before the targets in the future and where we need to be and goals, etc. There's so much of everything you see on the internet and on social media. Are you hitting your goals, and are you doing this? What you're going to achieve this year? And so I try and spend before thinking about the next step, but about where we are today. We've done this is our 6th year now, where we've done essentially just pushed out one product, which eventually we're going to diversify. I think that's inevitable. But what I wanted to get to was a point where we're really damn good at at least doing one thing in a market where we're competing against a lot of lenders that are, I suppose, a little bit more jack of all trades. I think we've been able to develop a brand and a model where we're recognised for being really, really good at small development lending, because it's still quite a poorly served part of the market. The lenders that we compete against are mainly bridging lenders with a development arm, or smaller family offices. So I wanted to get to a point where we are really well known for quality, in terms of not just our lending, but in terms of being a quality business. And I think we're getting to that point now where we're like, okay, let's start ramping this up to the next level. So that will involve other products, albeit bridging, etc. Maybe DevX, that sort of thing. I think that's probably just around the corner for us, and where we're going to take this next. But because we've been so focused on getting excellent development finance lending, we've not really had much focus on necessarily trying to be 200-300 million pound loan book, because I don't think that's type of business I want to run. The other side of that is that I want to one of the big challenges, and I'm sure you went through this at Avonmore, is how to scale and keep quality control at the same time. Because as soon as you start scaling and you start throwing more people into the pot, and you become more and more removed from the situations and the decision making, it's obviously more and more difficult to make sure that that same quality that's made us so good for the last few years is kept, and that that essence and that culture within the office is kept there, and that's a real I suppose challenge going forward.
Yeah, well, that's that point you just made there. It's the loss of I suppose that dilution of quality as you increase the headcount, increase the team. Having gone from a team of a founding team of 3 to 35 individuals at our peak in 2022, scaled it back to sort of high 20s now. I think when you grow that quickly, and particularly as we went from 15 or 16 to mid 30s in between the middle of 2020 and the middle of 2022, so a huge hiring spree. And certainly there's and we've seen quite a lot of staff turnover within the business over the last probably 18 to 24 months. So a loss of, I suppose, that a dilution or a loss of quality is always a concern. I think that I ask about volumes because I think that's something that people are interested in, but I also think that sometimes volume can be a vanity metric. I mean, there's certainly people who do huge volumes in bridging, especially regulated bridging, where the loan's on the book for 3 months, the margin is next to
the margin. Yeah,
there's no margin, and there's no. It's highly regulated, so the cost of acquisition is huge. The operational cost is enormous, and the loans aren't on the book for long, and they're not able to make any fees or proc out of it either. And it's not like they can make huge amounts of money on the default interest, so the loans go into default as well, because of the regulated nature of the loans, there's only so much that the lenders can do. So you have to respect that actually what's important is running and operating a quality business. And so whilst growing lending volumes for us is a priority and always has been, actually what are we focusing on this year as a board, and what's Dimitri and his team focusing on? It's client outcomes, it's levels of service. That's levels of service both for brokers, borrowers, and also our funding partners as well, and making sure that we continue to have zero losses. And so I think that kind of that mindset very much chimes with where you're at as well, which is you want to maintain that. And I think that maybe we lost a little bit of our sense, lost a bit of our sense of why as we grew very fast in terms of headcount. And so now distilling that down into a core team that really is bought into the vision, and what we as a business are about, will help us, I think, propel us for the next phase. And it sounds to me like you've got the right idea there. But something that a question I wanted to ask you though, which is that how are you making sure as the CEO of the business that you're working on the business rather than in the business? Because when you were talking about being credit committee, you're one of 2. It feels to me like you're having to probably do a lot of the business yourself. And I think we've had this conversation privately.
Yeah.
What's your plan to effectively work on the business rather than in the business to enable the business to grow and scale in the way that you want it to?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. I think that is the challenge for us as in terms of the next step, is how does Magnet Capital become stays just Magnet Capital, or not Sam and Ashley and everyone else who's involved. So I think the business needs to be bigger than the individuals, absolutely. So there are some moments where I think you have to kind of learn this on the hop a little bit in terms of how to not just relinquish control, but how to be comfortable with those around you who could step into our shoes in the same way that I was allowed to in my early career, and allow that for those functions to happen. Which in fairness, we've already started to allow that to happen, particularly with key client meetings where we have a policy of meeting every single person we lend to, either face to face or or on a Teams call. And we've started to allow that to happen in a slightly different process. So yeah, it's absolutely a challenge for us going forward. And I think the main thing that we're trying to implement is getting people to step up and actually take this on. But a big part of that is making sure people are trained properly. And so if we've got new individuals coming to the business, we want to give them every opportunity to grow. I think a lot of the way that we're doing that was shaped by the way that we were trained in the first place. So particularly my story and my experiences is something that I like to implement in terms of our business as well.
So again, you're giving people that layer of trust, that opportunity to that opportunity to give their opinions and basically show their own forms of leadership and taking the bull by the horns from an early stage. Is that kind of where you're taking this?
Yeah. For example, we had one of the guys that joined us at the end of last year. There was an opportunity where we had part of an advertising package to write a double-page interview for Trade magazine, and he'd only been here for I think 3 weeks. But I was just really enjoyed the way it started. It's a great name, getting your name out there. Go ahead and write it. And he went and did it. And he think again, it was just probably could have done with a little bit more experience in terms of answering questions related to development funding. But again, he's this one way of learning is by throwing him into the fire a little bit.
Yeah, I always thought that there was a long time when I was was redlining markups of our press releases and our marketing materials, and then one day I just turned around to the person running marketing and I said, no, I said this is ridiculous. What's going to happen? What is going to happen? What's the worst thing that's going to happen to this business if you put out a press release that looks like you've initially drafted it?
Yeah.
It's not going to be a disaster. It doesn't need me to write the perfect press release for you every single time, because that's just acting as an inhibitor for that person's personal growth, but also the business's growth, because I'm spending the time I'm spending reading a press release, that's time I'm not spending helping to grow the sales volumes, helping to build the funding relationships, to fill in the blank. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's a really good example.
Yeah, then I think then you're just being a professional editor rather than a professional development lender, and so that's not really what you wanted to be doing at the time.
Well, look, there were times, Ashley, where I've spent there's no role really I haven't done in Avonmore, to be fair, but that's one day it's HR, one day I would routinely spend my Sunday afternoons reconciling bank entries in Xero. I think my family might have liked to spend that time with me rather than me spending that time with Xero. Do you know what I mean? So I think, and Saturday mornings I'd spend 2 or 3 hours catching up on correspondence from the week. So fundamentally there was using a bookkeeper was probably the best 20 or 30,000 pounds a year that I could have spent, because of the time that it freed up for me as a consequence of that. So there's just there's so many examples of it that you can look to, and I think that's
I think it's just all those habits that you just do because that's what you do when you start a business is stuff you don't even notice that you shouldn't be doing that. Even stuff like sending emails on holiday, like the last holiday I went on in December was the first one that I didn't bring my laptop with, because it's just nonsense. It's a terrible habit. I got really far into it without touching my emails. Stuff like sending emails in the evening. There's a sense where you just need to not be doing things, and I think part of running a business is recognizing that as well. And you want to, I guess you want to be the point where you no longer consider yourself a startup, and you have to just let these functions happen by themselves. But you also don't want to let go because it's your baby.
I was actually looking through some old photos and videos on my phone yesterday, and I stumbled on some videos where we went to a lake resort in the south of the Czech Republic in 2018, and I remember it distinctly because it was probably the first time from when we founded Avonmore where I actually was able to enjoy a holiday and I wasn't looking at emails every 5 minutes, or wasn't picking the phone up every 5 minutes and trying to do something on or in the business. I mean, you're a better man than me, because I still take the laptop with me on holiday wherever I go. It doesn't get used as much. I don't spend as much time using it, but I still probably will check emails a couple of times a day. And when we went to Greece in the summer, I would participate in the odd Teams call. And it sounds to me like that's something you could probably you're a bit better able to leave alone. So in that respect, you may be a better man than me. So in some ways, you're able to rely on your team even more so than those of us in the ownership in our business.
So
what it was, maybe on the right track.
Yeah, there was a couple of experiences where I'd be away on holiday, and the couple of concerns have happened where there's an issue on a site, or this has happened, or someone's kicked off. And the problem is, when you close your laptop, it's still with you at that point. And now I'm on holiday and I'm hacked off about something. So it's kind of like that chain reaction. And now I'm spending vast amounts of money at dinner on holiday, to the point where actually that chain reaction shouldn't be happening. So yeah, I think, look, the business performs absolutely fine without me. It doesn't need my input every 2 seconds, whether I like to believe that or not. So yeah, I think that was a nice step, and I'm going to try and do my next holiday with 0 emails. That's the challenge.
Oh, I'm going to try and copy that, because actually we just had a skiing holiday back end of last year and early part of this year, and there was one of those days was effectively ruined by an email.
There you go.
And which ironically I probably overreacted to as well, in terms of my own emotional state as well. So it was almost like a double whammy. It's like I look back and I was like, did I really need to get so worked up about that?
Yeah.
And so I'm just like,
especially when you got the fresh air of the mountains in you as well, and you're still getting wound up by business.
Oh, dude, it was just like it was what was otherwise a really fantastic holiday, and it was just like, oh god, so it was just to get upset about it, and I'm getting annoyed about my reaction to it rather than the situation. Just touching on growth and where the business is going, I've got a long-standing view that we're going to increasingly see a sort of bifurcation of lenders in the bridging and development space, smaller bridging and development space particularly. Like yourselves, we do lend to sort of smaller scale developers. Product offering obviously is not identical, but we certainly operate within that space. My view is that the market is going to the lending space, the specialist lending space, is either going to go to one where people are doing 250 million pounds of lending a year, or it's going to be 20 or 30 million pounds of business. Because I think that ultimately the size and scale of the larger lenders will enable them to do larger. Not larger. They will have the pricing power, the pricing power, and the variety of funding sources to enable them to go up the risk curve, and otherwise leaving niche specialists to kind of pick up the scraps. Because the larger guys will effectively have hoovered up so much of the market. What's your view of that, and where do you see Magnet fitting into that equation?
Yeah, look, every time I've kind of made a prediction about where the market might go in the 18 months, there's something completely left field happens, like COVID, or supply chain, or building cost, materials shooting up, or something like that, where saying we tried to plan for one thing and something else happens. So yeah, you may well be right, but I think we still have the bones of Regentsmead, the way we operate. So Regentsmead was particularly great at riding out downturns in the market. as they showed they did on several occasions. So I think one thing we haven't seen for a while is a major economic event, like an '08 style event, which, the longer that we kind of go without experiencing one is probably means that the sooner it may or may not happen. But I think we're in a position where, because we're not particularly garish in terms of our loan to values, we have run a business that leverages massively on relationships and being nimble and dynamic. And I think there's always going to be space for lenders that do that. And I think there's always going to be a demand there for lenders that can do that. And so many experiences that I've had with our clients who have borrowed from other lenders, when they've come to us with a little bit of skepticism or reticence, because they think, we're the borrower, you're the lender, where actually, we sit down, have a meeting and say, actually, we're on the same side of the table with you. Okay, we're heavily investing in your business. We want to know everything about you as part of that, but we want to help you. And there's been so many occasions that we don't necessarily publicize, where I think other lenders would have treated the situation differently, where actually we probably valued either A, doing the right thing, or B, the relationship more. So we could have, try to step in, or put in a receiver or what have you, where we've actually chosen to, or whether it's grant an extension, or give them some grace on their interest that they need to pay, or what have you. They're sometimes doing something where we actually probably not necessarily best for our bottom line, but best for a longer term view. That's the way we like to think and operate. And so I think there's always going to be demand for that. I remember I was on site end of last year in a place called Winchelsea, and there's a guy we're lending to who's doing a bar conversion down there, and he's old school. He's in his 60s. He's been doing this for decades. He's borrowed from lots of different lenders. And I remember he was talking to me around the site, and we were talking, and he kind of stops mid-sentence, and he goes, "Oh, this is just like the good old days." And that sense of where we're old-fashioned in a good way, and the fact that kind of comes to that people can experience that for themselves. It's quite a visceral experience of borrowing money from us. I think that's just going to put us in really good stead over the years to come.
Listen, I completely agree with your approach, and I completely understand why you've got great customer satisfaction, because your ability to get on site and see clients, particularly as co-owner of the business, co-founder of the business, that's going to engender you so well with your clients and with brokers and everyone that you deal with. I guess the challenge is that you don't have 40 Ashleys and Sams. You've got you are ultimately just a couple of individuals within a wider team, and so that's where I suppose that's where I say the scale. That's where I think the scaling point comes. I think that the smaller end of the scale, if one as an entrepreneur is content to stay in the sort of smaller end of the lending scale, I think you maintaining that level of service quality will continue to serve you really well, and you'll be able to maintain that size of business. I think though that it's that scaling that beyond that scaling a business beyond that style becomes increasingly challenging unless you can either do much larger tickets in terms of individual loans, but you're certainly not going to be able to do the same size of loans, but more of them, like 3 times off them, because you're just not going to be able to be in that many places at once.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's one of the challenges that we've got ahead of us. Is so as I said earlier, it's scaling whilst maintaining that quality. Yeah. Because I don't want to scale with a product that's just not reflective of what we are. Yeah. So that's absolutely a challenge that we're discussing internally as we speak at the moment. Sure.
Yeah. I think, look, knowing you'll probably find the right balance. You seem to be someone who's keen to who wants to grow, but not necessarily for growth's sake. So you'll find the right way to do it, and make it a great success, as you always do.
Michael, I'm 34. I'm not in any rush, that's for sure.
No. Well, I think, and you clearly have which we've always had as well, is that long-term greedy approach. So there've been even with us as well. There've been plenty of times where we've taken we've taken a hit in the short term financially, where we could have taken more economics out of the situation, and so that in the longer term we could benefit from it I suppose that burnishing the reputation or building relationship with people, knowing that of course no good deed goes unpunished, and sometimes you do people favors and you don't get anything in return. But
Absolutely,
that's not how. But that should be in the minority. In the majority of cases, karma is real, believe it or not.
Yeah. I think you're right.
Okay, so just looking to sort of go on the wind down now. Just want to learn. Just want to talk about a few more personal things. Obviously, we talked about the health and lifestyle stuff, so we've kind of covered that part of the show off already. But I wanted to talk about people that have provided you with motivation, inspiration in your life. People that that matter to you, whether that's your parents, whether that's people that have provided you with with important mentorship and guidance as a younger person. Are there any particular people that you'd like to kind of acknowledge or recognize today?
Yeah, I suppose I come from a family where we've always been quite entrepreneurial. So my grandfather came here on the kinder transport and started quite a substantial manufacturing business throughout his life. I'm one of four kids where all three of my siblings run their own business of differing sizes in completely differing industries. And I think, we've just always had that in our family. My dad ran family business for a long time, again in the manufacturing sector. So yeah, there's amount of times where I've had, it's a real, challenge or a headache happen at work, and, I'll pick up the phone to my dad or one of my brothers or what have you, and say, let me throw this at you. And then you're speaking to someone who comes from not operating in finance or property or anything like that. They're operating in a completely different world. And lo and behold, they'll probably have quite a useful way of thinking, because it's different to everyone, immediately around you. And that's been really helpful over the years, just being able to have that position there. I've even ran friends before when I've had something, quite unusual happen at work, or, there's a challenge, staff or what have you. I've had situations where I've rang up one of my friends and said, this has happened. What do you think of this? You'll never be able to, do this all on your own. So the fact that, to have that kind of network behind, around you, is absolutely essential. And, firstly, it's the sense that you're not necessarily burdening, people with, all constantly ringing them with this. But I think actually people quite appreciate it when you pick up the phone, and you're able to have, quite an honest chat about, whatever scenario it may be. I won't always take their advice, but I'm always try and be as open as possible to different suggestions.
I took note. Obviously, your grandfather coming in on a kinder transport as part of the kinder transport. Have you watched the movie One Life yet?
No, I haven't. No,
Ilsen?
It's on my list. It's absolutely on my list. I've been trying to get around to watching it.
Must be quite. I imagine it would be quite surreal for you to watch, knowing that someone you're descended from. It's their that's. If it wasn't for him, you might not be here. So that's there's probably
absolutely.
a poignancy to that.
We have a picture that someone in my family found in a newspaper years ago, and it's my grandfather's in the background getting on the kinder transport, and he's there with his little bag and his jacket. So we've got that printed. That's a really cool memory to have.
Yeah, well, that's so it's pretty amazing to have such a connection with such a such a historical event, and probably puts the current the current troubles and current attitudes out into some context. And then I suppose the next question I wanted to ask is, what if you were to give your younger self, your sort of 17, 18-year-old self, or you can pick an age, some positive self-talk, what would you say to yourself, and why? What guidance would you give yourself, your younger self?
I just think I've always had an attitude of just I've never really had any sort of self-doubt along the way, and I think that just I'd advise myself never to lose that, because it's so important, even from when it, came the times that I said yes to doing public speaking, or yes to writing an article, or yes to taking on something that I completely had no clue about, but just said yes to it anyway. And then when we launched Magnet Capital, I mean, personally, me along with Sam and other people personally committed, a lot of money into the business from day one. But I never for a second crossed my mind that, it wouldn't work. And I never even entertained that idea. And I think doubting yourself and looking at the downside is a very human reaction to have. And I've just, somehow managed a way to just have, almost call it blind faith, but absolute, unhinged belief in what I could do, what I can achieve. It's like you asked before about, scaling up Magnet Capital. The way I see Magnet Capital today, we're still embryonic. We're still at the beginning stages of our journey. And, we're, just scratching the surface of where, we want to go and what I want to achieve. So, if I, speak to my younger self, I'd say keep being, having ridiculous, belief in yourself, because that was, as well as maybe causing a few problems, it will open a hell of a lot of doors for you.
Yeah, well, quite well. It's obviously serving you well, as things stand. Now, I think this will be the last question, but as many of our audience know, I'm heavily involved in a charity called the Props Lunch, or a charity event called the Props Lunch and Awards. This year it will be at the Grosvenor House Hotel on the 27th of June, starting at 11 a.m. And if you want to get tickets, get in touch with me or go to the Variety website. Ashley, you worked for a man at Regentsmead who obviously was very heavily involved in, I suppose, in philanthropy. Has any of that philanthropic endeavours? Is that something that you have continued on in within Magnet? Are there any particular causes or charities that you're close to or you care about?
Yeah, I've been heavily involved with a charity called Norwood for quite a few years now. They have annual dinner. They have property dinners. They have young Norwood as well, which I've been involved in. Amazing charity. They do some brilliant work in the social care sector. I try and whatever free time I get is to be as involved as I can.
It's Norwood is for those that aren't familiar. It's actually quite a well-known and very highly respected charity. Charity that what sort of what is it? Is it children that Norwood helps, or is it anyone? People of all ages. People who need care. Have whether they've got severe illnesses that hold them back in life. They're able to provide housing for them, or different schemes. So I think they're I suppose it's a care sort of charity in that sense. Yeah, well, it's obviously it's a great cause, and actually the big supporters of Norwood, which are the Zakai brothers, Sol and Eddie Zakai, who are the founders of Topland Group. They're actually being recognised with the Lifetime Achievement Award at this year's Props. So it's actually quite nice to see an overlap of two charities or two charity events that don't normally sort of have any interactions together. It's quite nice that we can perhaps draw some of the audience from Norwood to the Props. We should have hopefully about 1,200 people in the room in June. So, and hopefully Ashley, we'll see you there as well. And I'm sure there's a nomination for Young Property Personality of the Year coming your way, or someone will be making a nomination on your behalf very soon.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Ashley, I think we're about done, and thank you for your time. It's been really enjoyable. Always like talking to you. Always like spending time with you. And look, many of our audience will likely want to get in touch with you and maybe ask you to do some public speaking for them. Who knows? It sounds like you're pretty good at it. But otherwise, and certainly from today's discussion, that's certainly been my experience. But if someone wants to get in touch with you, what are the best ways for people to get in touch? Is it LinkedIn? Is it Instagram? Is it through company website? Feel free to let people know the best way that you might like them to reach out to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm personally on LinkedIn, Ashley Ilsen, and also on Twitter, which I use less frequently. Also our company website, magnetcapital.co.uk. You can find me across all of those platforms. And just want to say thank you, for having me on. Really enjoyed the chat. Very refreshing. Some good ideas shared as well. So I really appreciate it.
Well, look, people sometimes question the logic as to why I'd have people from quote unquote competing businesses, but specialist finance market is still relatively nascent, still relatively small, and for me it's all about I want to promote and build up all of us within the sector, because the bigger the sector gets, the better quality people we get coming into the sector, and the better quality and a lower cost of capital that we also get. So we all benefit, and for me it's a great way of giving back and trying to help all of us in the industry, not just trying to be a promotional vehicle for me and Avonmore. So I've really appreciated having you on. You're a remarkable guy, Ashley, and I think we're excited to see where things take you going forwards. For our audience, for our listeners and our viewers across Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and wherever else you might be getting this, thank you very much for your time. I've been Michael Dean. As I said before, if you haven't blocked me or muted me yet on various social medias, I am at property_funder. If you are, however, inclined to get in touch with me, please reach out across the various platforms, and I look forward to receiving your feedback, and tell me what you liked, and otherwise what we could do better on the podcast. But for now, thanks everyone. Appreciate all your time. Ashley, you've been a great guest, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.